Assalamu alaikum. We are here in Hebron to visit Hisham. Thank you so much for the invitation. First of all, we would like to know about the general situation here in Hebron and the current situation, especially for people who don't know anything about what is going on in Hebron.
Yeah, Hebron is a Palestinian city, part of the occupied West Bank. We are in the south of the West Bank, and Hebron is one of two cities where we have Israeli colonial settlers living in the heart of the city. One of two occupied cities in 1967. One of them is Hebron, and the other one is the east part of Jerusalem, as it was occupied in 1967. And according to the international law, it is part of the West Bank. In Hebron, we have 8 settler enclaves, and these enclaves are inhabited by colonial settlers. Each one of them can be one building, two close building, or three close building, but they are not geography connected, and everything in between is Palestinian. Now, in the excuse of protecting the settlers, the Israeli authorities has developed a system of separation within the area. They have restricted the movement in the area that includes the settler enclaves and the main route connecting the settler enclaves in Hebron with the settlement of Kiryat Arba to the east of the city. To guarantee this, they closed more than 65 roads completely, roads and alleys with cement panels, cement blocks, built-up walls, metal bars, barbed wires, different types of closure, and then they left 20 roads opened, but with the checkpoints on them. Now, these checkpoints are very equipped and supplied with a smart system. You go through into the area through a turnstile gate, then a metal detector gate, then another turnstile gate. These checkpoints are manned by Israeli personnel, Israeli security personnel. They have smart cameras that have facial recognition ability, and so on. Of course, within the restricted area, we have nearly 12 kilometers of roads where Palestinians are not allowed to drive on them. Part of that, more than 1.5 kilometers, where Palestinians are not allowed even to walk. And here I ask everyone in the world, like, you imagine yourself living in a street where you cannot walk to your house, you cannot drive to your house, how you get there? And simply that was irrelevant to the Israeli authorities. And of course, this forced lots of people out, very few who remained, they access their homes through the rooftops, as it is the old city where homes are connected. So people go up to the roof, walk one roof to another, one roof to another, then they get to somebody's house that have an entrance to a back road. Of course, this can be done by young, strong people. What about little children, elderly people, getting heavy supplies into your house, or when you have an emergency medical need? All these are not, all these needs are not available for the Palestinians. And because of this, and the Israeli practices on the checkpoints, delaying people, humiliating them, and so on, that forced lots of people out of the restricted area and even the surroundings of it. We believe that this is an ethnic cleansing policy. The goal of it is to empty as much as possible of the houses and the stores within the restricted area, and in the future develop geographic connection between the settler enclaves in town and the settlement of Kiryat Arba at the eastern hills of the city, and then declare that as a Jewish city of Hebron. This is not a secret, by the way. One of the settlers' buildings in Hebron has a big sign, for example, that says Kiryat Arba is Hebron. And Kiryat Arba is the Old Testimony name of the town. So for them, all Hebron is Jewish, Kiryat Arba. And also within Israeli politicians, in 2005, when the former Israeli Prime Minister Ariel Sharon declared his plan, what he called the one-sided disengagement plan. He talked about areas that Israel will leave with or without an agreement with the Palestinians. He talked that time about the Gaza Strip, some minor settlements within the north of the West Bank, which it happened, they pulled out. And he talked about areas that Israel will never leave, with or without an agreement, like the major settlements blocks in the West Bank, the Jordan Valley, and that time he mentioned Hebron. And he did not mention Kiryat Arba, the settlement out of Hebron, but he mentioned Hebron. 3-4 years ago, when the president of the U.S., Donald Trump, talked about the deal of the century, also Israeli Prime Minister at that time, Benjamin Netanyahu, he talked that he have kind of understanding with Trump that Hebron will be part of the areas that Israel will keep, and of course annexed to Israel in any future deal. So the Israelis are going on in this project, and the price of it, of course, is too high for the Palestinians.
Yeah. Okay, you're the coordinator from the Hebron Defense Committee. What are the missions of the Hebron Defense Committee and the goals?
We work on against the colonial presence in Hebron, calling for freedom of movement for the Palestinians, and also we work against all forms of colonialism and racism in Palestine. Our main focus is Hebron, but we believe that the Palestinians in all historic Palestine are facing a policy of discrimination that has been declared recently by Amnesty International, as apartheid policies. The Palestinians in all Palestine face quite similar policies, whether they hold Israeli citizenship or they hold the identity card of the West Bank. Palestinians in the Negev now are facing a policy of demolition and restriction. The town of the Palestinian village in Al Araqib, for example, in the Negev, has been maybe destroyed 140 times by the Israeli authorities. In the West Bank, we have, for example, Susia and we have Khan al Ahmar are on threat of complete eviction and ethnic cleansing from the area. The home demolition policy is the same. So if you are a Palestinian living in Palestine, you don't have similar rights as your other brother Palestinian who lives somewhere else, and of course you don't have same rights as the authority that runs everything here in the country, which is the state of Israel, that runs, as I said, a system of apartheid here.
Okay. What makes it most difficult for you with this work with the Hebron Defense Committee, and and what goes well?
We are under Israeli military occupation. It's not easy to move. You may pay high price for your activities here. I live in a city where there are many of the streets of the city I cannot access. And when we organize, for example, any protest, any activity, we face, brutal power by the Israeli troops. We have activists that have been wounded before. We have activists that have been arrested before because of their nonviolence resistance to the Israeli occupation. And the other thing is that although there is higher voices in the world, that are raising their voices, against the Israeli policies, but that is on the level of the, let's say what I call the public. In the public, amongst the public in the different countries, there is, but on the political level, in the formal level, unfortunately, most of the countries in the world are having good relations with Israel, and with good relations, they have economic cooperation, scientific cooperation, educational cooperation, cultural cooperation, and all this contributes to empowering the occupation and the discriminatory policies of Israel and the apartheid regime here. Of course, when we talk about apartheid, almost all the countries in the world have signed. There is a treaty, an international treaty that talks about the elimination of all forms of discrimination and racism and so on in the world, which of course contradicts to commitment, as these countries signed such an agreement and then they support an apartheid regime. That's from one side. When we talk about the occupation of the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, the siege on Gaza, and so on. This also, when you cooperate with Israel, that means you are empowering an occupying power, and according to the Geneva Conventions, the countries in the world should not recognize the occupation, should not approve it, and should not support it in any mean. Today, we have very strong voices, for example, against the Russian going into Ukraine. Even the ICC, wanted to start an investigation about claimed war crimes in Ukraine, while the Palestinians have submitted lots of reports to the ICC relating different types of crimes against the humanity and war crimes to the court, and we don't see any progress in it since the Attorney General of the ICC has been changed, Fatou Bensouda. It was replaced a few months ago with a new public prosecutor. We did not hear anything from him, while we start hearing voices about war crimes in Ukraine. Of course, there are rising declarations and more expansion of sanctions, for example, against Russia for going into Ukraine, while we have the Israeli occupation to the West Bank, the Gaza Strip, and of course East Jerusalem and the Golan Heights since 1967. And when we talk about sanctions, nobody approves this. They say that it is not so positive and that they want to use other methods and so on. And, the Israelis are not listening to anything.
Yeah.
This is simply very clear double standards,
absolutely.
And unethical.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so sad. Yeah. Are you working together with other organizations?
Of course, we network with other local groups, and popular resistance groups in different places in the West Bank. We work also close to political factions, and we also work with some Israeli partners. We have very clear Israeli partner called Tarabut, which is a Palestinian, Jewish and Palestinian joint or a political organization within the Green Line who believe in the right of Palestine, the right of return to Palestinian refugees, and the right of Palestinians for statehood and for ending the occupation. And of course, who work also against all forms of racism in Palestine. And we are very proud with this relation. We talk about this is kind of joint struggle. And our issue, we are not a sectarian group, and we want a good future for everyone,
Sure.
And so we work closely, as I said, with several other Palestinian groups and some Israelis in order to eliminate this system of apartheid in Palestine.
Yeah. Do you have, my last question, do you have any expectations or wishes, advices to people who support the Palestinians outside of Palestine?
As the formal public opinion, the foreign countries, they are not fulfilling their commitments. I think individuals have more ethical responsibility. Part of that is that they themselves do not support the occupation in any means. And maybe their contribution to this can be their boycott to Israeli products. Of course, in addition to different types of activities that many of our friends do around the globe, like demonstrating against the Israeli policies, having sit ins, writing and signing petitions, and so on. But I think personal boycott is something that is materialism, that you do something here. And of course, I think that all our friends all over the globe are in need to have kind of a shift in their activities to pressure firms and investment companies to divest from companies that support the occupation and the settlements within the West Bank. And of course, we want your countries to put sanctions on the Israeli apartheid regime, the same as they put
Yeah.
sanctions on the apartheid regime in South Africa at mid-80s, which ended up dismantled the South African apartheid regime and released Nelson Mandela. And if these people, they talk about Palestinian terrorism, what the Palestinians do, of course, at the mid 80s, the ANC, the African National Congress, was also labeled as a terrorist organization by the great majority of the countries in the West. And then they received Nelson Mandela as a hero after the elimination of the apartheid regime in South Africa. I simply say we, the Palestinians, are the same as any other nation in the world. We are not better than any other people in the world, but there is no people in the world who are better than us. We deserve to live in peace and dignity, and we deserve to practice our right to self-determination, the same as any other nation in the world.
Yeah.
And this is the core of the conflict. Like when you talk to the Israelis, they try to mislead you. They talk about maybe Palestinian terrorism, the Palestinians did so and so, but they don't talk about the basic issue, which is
Yeah.
the colonization and the
Yeah.
racial policies. And of course, wherever there is injustice, there will be some people who will fight against it.
Yeah.
So instead of going into military solutions and sanctions and collective punishment and racist policies on the excuse of security, it's better to build the bridges and give rights to the people that you control, and then that will contribute to a better future for everyone.
Yeah, hopefully.
Inshallah.
Thank you. Thank you very, very much.